Hello everyone, welcome to our devotions today. We want to talk about acceptable worship. And that will take us back into the Old Testament. We want to look at the children of Israel and their desire to have the Ark of God, the symbol of God's presence, through King David's efforts. That takes us to the book of 2 Samuel chapter 6. And I want us to read in verses 12 to 14, and it says, Now King David was told the Lord had blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the Ark of God. So David went to bring up the Ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. When those who were carrying the Ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. Wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all his might. So here we have King David. He's happy, rejoicing, finally bringing back the Ark of God to the city. And he is there making animal sacrifices. And so much is happening. Everybody's excited. And he brings the Ark to the city of David. There were shouts of joy. The trumpets were there heralding its arrival. And we see David breaking out in spontaneous leaping and jumping and dancing with all his effort, with all his energy, even adding additional sacrifices for the arrival. So they were so happy. Why? Because the ark had been missing for more than 20 years. It was in the house of Obed-Edom. So they were excited. And I want to encourage us to long for God's presence, just as King David. Enter into his gates with thanksgiving and praise, and be enthusiastic and display that kind of exuberance as King David did. So let's continue in verse 15 of that same chapter, and it says, While he and all Israel were bringing up the ark of God with shouts and the sounds of trumpets, as the ark of God was entering into the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, she watched from a window. And when she saw King David, he was leaping and dancing before the Lord. She despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside a tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. Now when we just look at Michal's, her response, there's some people don't like how we worship. But our worship must really be for the audience of one, not for our neighbor's approval. Now let's look when David comes home, how she responded. And it says in verse 20, When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him, and she said, now first we had read she had despised him in her heart. Now what's in her heart is coming out. She says, How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his servants, as any vulgar fellow would. And David said to Michal, It was before the Lord who chose me, rather than your father or anyone from his house, when he appointed me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke about, I will be held in honor. So we just look at Michal's response. She accused David of being half naked. He wasn't half naked. He just took off his royal robes. He had on his linen garment, just as the priests would wear. And he had no problem. He didn't mind worshiping together with the slaves, the lowest level in society. So our titles, our positions really don't impress God. We're all on an equal plane when it comes to worship before him. What does the linen garment represent? It represents the righteousness of God. We come dressed in his righteousness alone. Based on what Jesus did for us on the cross, that is how we can access his presence, through the righteousness given to us by Jesus Christ. So I want to encourage us as we look at Michal's response, that she was more people conscious than God conscious. I noted she was not a worshiper. Everybody went to meet the ark. She stayed and she was just watching from a window, observing David primarily and everybody else. And I want to encourage us, don't become a brother watcher or sister watcher in church and get distracted from our worship, how they're worshiping, if they're worshiping or they're not worshiping. And we want to be like David. His response to celebrate because what God has done. He rejoiced that God chose him to be king. And he was willing to humble himself, as he said, and worship his God, not for the audience of those around. He said he was prepared to be undignified in the presence of others. Now, verse 23, let's see what it says. And it says, and Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. The result, God judged her. She remained childless and unfruitful the rest of her days. So it's worth noting, genuine worship paves the way for a fruitful life. So I want to encourage us today, let's present acceptable worship, worship to him alone.